Good day, students and families. Let's read. My name is Mrs. C. The title of today's book is The Fox and the Falling Leaves. The author who wrote the words in the book is Julia Rawlinson, and the illustrator who drew the pictures is Tiffany Beek. Before we begin reading, let's look at some vocabulary words and other important things to know before we begin. All 6 of these vocabulary words will be in today's story. I want you to know what they mean before we read. Our first word is summer. Summer is the warmest season of the year. In Florida, it's a very hot season. Our next vocabulary word is autumn. Autumn is the 3rd season of the year when leaves fall. A lot of times, instead of calling this season autumn, we will call this season fall, kind of like the leaves that are falling. Our third vocabulary word is whirl. Whirl means to move quickly around and around. Maybe you haven't heard the word whirl before, but you've heard the word swirl. They're very similar. They're synonyms. They have the same meaning. Our next word is porcupine. A porcupine is an animal with spines or quills on its body and tail. So remember, those spines and quills are those pointy parts that can poke you. Our next word is shiver. Shiver means to shake slightly from feeling cold. So if you were shivering, ooh, you might actually be shaking a little bit because it is so, so cold. And our last vocabulary word is icicles. Icicles are hanging ice formed from freezing, dripping water. You'll hear all 6 of these words today when I read. Before we begin reading, I want to look at some important things that we're going to be studying today. The first one is characters. What is a character? The characters are the people, animals, or creatures in a story. You can ask yourself, who is the story about, to figure out who our characters are. The next focus is our setting. What is a setting? The setting is where and when the story takes place. So a lot of times we do think about where something is happening. In this picture, I see it's in a cabin, it looks like, or a house. It's in a forest. I see some trees around, but we don't often ask when. When can be as simple as during the day. Maybe an entire story just takes place during one day, or it can take a longer amount of time. The season in this picture I can see is probably winter. I see a lot of snow on the ground, on the fence, on the trees, on the cabin. So when can be as long as a season, as long as a year, as long as a lifetime. So setting considers where a story takes place and when it takes place. Our last focus is plot. What is a plot? The plot is the series of events in a story, the important parts from the beginning, middle, and end. You can ask yourself, what happens? So when we talk about plot, you'll often hear the word key details. So the key details are those most important parts in the beginning, middle, and end. A lot of times we'll have other important details that are not as important to the overall story, but are still important to helping us understand what's going on. So it's really kind of tricky sometimes to tell what that plot really needs to help us understand the full story. So ask yourself, what happens? What are the main things that occur during our story? So I'm going to read our story now, and we're going to talk about the characters, the setting, and the plot at the end, so we can focus on those points. Here is our front cover again, The Fox and the Falling Leaves. And look, I love this book because it has a super cute back cover too. Look at that cute little fox, and he's watching a leaf. Isn't that adorable? Back covers can have information, they can have illustrations, all sorts of things. This one had a cute illustration. Okay, so let's look at the setting in this very first picture. It's really important. The illustrator included this picture before even the title page. So they really wanted us to look at this and to think about it before we began reading. Here's our title page. And here's where our story begins. Look, it looks a lot different already, doesn't it? The world was changing. Each morning when Fletcher bounded out of the den, everything seemed just a little bit different. The rich green of the forest was turning to a dusty gold, and the soft, swishing sound of summer was fading to a crinkly whisper. Fletcher's favorite tree looked dull, dry, and brown. Fletcher was beginning to get worried. So look, there's Fletcher. He's looking up at his tree. Remember, we just saw the first picture their illustrator included to show us what his tree looked like before. This is what Fletcher was used to seeing, and this is what it looks like now. I think my tree is sick, said Fletcher. What's wrong with it? His mother asked. Its leaves are turning brown, said Fletcher. Don't worry, it's only autumn, she said. Remember, autumn means fall, it's a season. Fletcher ran back to his tree and patted the rough bark. Don't worry, it's only autumn, he said. You'll be feeling better soon. Patting his tree. But the tree didn't get better. Each day, more leaves turned brown. One morning, the wind blew a small brown leaf off of a branch. Fletcher jumped up and caught it very gently in his paw. Don't worry, tree, I've got your leaf. I'll fix you. Fletcher looked around, picked up a piece of grass, and carefully tied the leaf to a branch. Just then, another gust of wind ruffled Fletcher's fur. The little leaf shook itself free and fluttered back to the ground. Fletcher picked it up again and thought very hard. Then he poked the leaf onto a twig and pushed it down firmly. Now you hold on tight, said Fletcher. No more flying around. The little leaf gave a tiny rustle in reply. What do you think? Do you think it's going to stay there? I don't think so. The next day, a strong wind was blowing through the forest. Fletcher rushed out of the den and ran all the way to his tree. Lots of branches were bare, and little lost leaves spun everywhere. Don't worry, tree, I'll catch them for you, I promise. Round and round and round whirled Fletcher after the swirling leaves. So he's whirling, he's spinning around, and the leaves are swirling, they're spinning around too. Remember those words? They have the same meaning or a similar meaning. Leaves! Wonderful! Just what I need for my nest, said a squirrel. But these belong to the tree, said Fletcher. Don't take them away. The tree doesn't need them any more, said the squirrel, bounding off. Help! Help! The wind and the squirrel are stealing our leaves, said Fletcher. Like the squirrel's got a big pile. It's like that tree doesn't need these leaves anymore. Leaves! Terrific! Just what I need to keep warm, said a porcupine, rolling around. But these belong to the tree, said Fletcher, plucking leaves from the porcupine's needles. Not any more, snuffled the porcupine, and away he rolled. Help! Help! The wind, the squirrel, and the porcupine are stealing our leaves, cried Fletcher. So see the quills? All those leaves are sticking to the porcupine's spiny quills. He just wants them to stay warm, I think. Oh, look at the tree now. Looks very colorful. What do you think those things could be? Suddenly, a flock of friendly birds swooped down from the sky. Ah, they're bluebirds. They picked up the leaves in their beaks and poked them onto the tree's branches. Soon the tree was leafy again, and Fletcher flopped down and smiled. Thank you, birds, thank you, he gasped as the birds fluttered away. He lay looking up through the leaves at the sky and drifted off to sleep. There he is at the bottom of the tree, feeling a little bit better. But the wind continued to blow, and the branches still danced. The leaves shivered and shook themselves and began to wriggle free. They tossed and turned and twitched and twirled and tumbled to the ground. They brushed Fletcher's ears and nose and filled his dreams with a whispering sound. When Fletcher finally woke up, he couldn't believe his eyes. Instead of a roof of dancing leaves, all he could see were bare branches against the sky. "Oh, tree, I'm so sorry," gulped Fletcher. "All your leaves are gone." But then he saw high in the branches one small leaf still holding on. "I won't let the wind steal that one," said Fletcher, and he began to climb. He crawled along to the last leaf and held it firmly onto its branch. All day long the wind blew, the branch bounced, and Fletcher held tight. "I'll stay with you, leaf," he said. "Don't worry." But then, with a sudden whoosh of wind, the branch bounced high. With a blip, the leaf let go and fluttered like a little flag clutched in Fletcher's paw. The last one. Fletcher looked sadly at the leaf he had promised to save. He carried it carefully down the tree and back to the den. He made a cozy little bed for it and gently tucked it in. But all night long he could only think of his tree all on its own. At dawn, Fletcher tiptoed outside. The wind had finally stopped blowing and the air was cold. The moon still hung in the clear sky and pale stars glimmered. As he came to his favorite tree, Fletcher saw a magical sight. Look at the tree now. It looks different again. Isn't that beautiful? The tree was hung with 1,000 icicles, shining silver in the early light. "You are more beautiful than ever," whispered Fletcher. "But are you all right?" A tiny breeze shivered the branches, making a sound like laughter, and in the light of the rising sun, the sparkling branches nodded. Fletcher gave his tree a hug. Then he went back to the den for a nice, warm breakfast. There's that tree again, looking very, very different. The end. All right, so let's go back and revisit some of those topics and points that we were learning about before. All right, here's where we left off with the plot. Let's go back and look at our characters in this book. Who are the characters? Remember, we can ask who the story is about to find the answer. The main character is definitely Fletcher, right? We see him the most. He is on every page. His mom is pretty important too. She's in the beginning of the story, she's near the end of the middle, and she's at the end of the story too. So she reoccurs, and she is also an important character. We also have some smaller characters that aren't main characters. They're not in most of the story, but they still help tell it. We have the squirrel who wants to collect leaves, the porcupine who wants the leaves to stay warm, and the friendly birds who try to help Fletcher put those leaves back on the branches. So all of these were also characters who were in the story. It's important to note that this story is fiction, right? It's fake. Talking animals, we couldn't have those in real life. But because this is a fictional story, characters can do all sorts of things. Animals can talk, they can wear clothes, all sorts of things that wouldn't happen in real life. Now, let's ask, where is the setting? So the where is in a beautiful forest during autumn. So we've got the location, it doesn't change, right? He's in the forest the whole time. And the setting mostly for when is during autumn. We do have some changes in our story though. In the beginning, we can see that Fletcher was looking at his tree in the summertime. It's bright, it's sunny, everything's green. So we can see in the very, very beginning, before our book even begins, it was a different season. It was summer. As soon as our story does begin, it becomes fall or autumn, and it's like this through almost the entire story, right? More leaves are falling every day, things are brown and gold and orange, the wind is blowing, it's getting cooler and colder. The birds are trying to put those leaves back, but look, the tree is getting more and more bare until it doesn't have any leaves at all. So this season is changing. Time is passing. We can tell because that tree wouldn't have lost all of its leaves in one day, right? So the whole season of autumn is passing by, and we're either already in winter at the end or we're getting very close to winter at the end, right? It can snow in fall, especially up north, not really so much in Florida, but it's mostly snowy in those winter months, right? So we've moved the when throughout the story through a few seasons. We've started with summer, moved all the way through autumn, mostly, that's where we stayed, and all the way into winter, or at least the approach of winter. All right, now let's talk about the plot. What is the plot? What are the most important parts of this story? So we kind of talked about characters, right? We talked about all of these sub-characters. The details with the squirrel and the porcupine and the birds helping out, that's not the most important thing that's going on, right? But it all does help to form this plot. The most important things that happen are in the beginning, the middle, and the end. In the beginning, Fletcher thinks something is wrong with his tree. So there's a problem already. A lot of times a plot will have a problem and a solution, how we fix the problem. So in the beginning, his tree looks sick, right? He doesn't understand the seasons. He's probably a baby fox. So he thinks his tree is sick. In the middle, he spends most of the story trying to save his tree, but there's nothing he can do about it, right? The season is changing anyway, and the tree is changing with it. So the middle, the important event is Fletcher trying to save his tree, but the season changing and the tree changing anyway. In the end, even though the tree's not back to normal, we have our resolution or our problem is solved because Fletcher learns that his tree is actually okay. He learns that the changing season and the tree changing is normal, and he discovers that his tree is just fine and to him more beautiful than ever when it has those beautiful icicles. So the beginning, the tree is sick, right? Or Fletcher thinks so. The middle, Fletcher tries to save and fix his tree, but he can't do anything. In the end, his tree is actually fine, and he learns that his tree is beautiful and will be okay. All right. So, what is your favorite season of the year? Take a few moments to talk about this with your parent or a sibling or a friend. Tell them what your favorite season is and then tell them why. If you like autumn or fall the most, what's your favorite part? Do you have a favorite holiday, a favorite vacation spot you like to go to? Do you like those falling and color changing leaves? Whichever season you pick, make sure you share some details and tell why it's your favorite season too. All right, I'm Mrs. C. I really hope you enjoyed the fox and the falling leaves, and I will see you next time. Goodbye, goodbye.